Welcome to the Human Conversation Podcast with Jules White, the real Dragon Slayer. Tune in fortnightly for human conversation about business and sales. Enjoy business expert interviews, educational episodes, and virtual cuppers with entrepreneur business owners. And here is your host, Jules White.
So, hello everybody, episode 4. We're really rolling through this now. I'm so excited and I totally love doing my podcasts now. I so love it. And I have a list of amazing guests who are going to be with me in the weeks to come as we record more and more of these. But this week, I've got a fabulous lady with me. She's absolutely awesome. And the reason I wanted to do this is because we're going to talk about a subject which is very close to my heart with regard to sales, with regard to all of my methodology and all the things I believe in. And equally, when you hear about how I work with this lady, you'll realise that actually it's a big part of what she does too. So, first of all, let me just introduce you to Gayle Johnson. Hello, Gayle.
Hello, Jules. Thank you for having me.
It's so great to have you on my podcast. Now, just so everybody who is listening knows who you are with regard to, well, how do I know you and how did we meet? Well, we met online, which was fabulous, in the wonderful Facebook groups that we hang out in. But what you're doing is very important because you're helping me to write my book, which is almost done.
Yes.
How exciting is that? So you're helping me to write my book in the capacity of you give me that direction that I need. I write, you edit, and you also keep me accountable. And I think all of those things have been just super to have. You know, anyone who is thinking of writing a book, it's no mean feat. And I think if you've just got somebody with you who really knows what they're doing for all of those elements I've mentioned, then you are really in good hands. So Gayle, that's why I love working with you.
Oh, thank you, Jules. I love our collaborations. It's just sparky, isn't it? It's amazing to witness this thing being born. It didn't exist this time last year.
I know, that's the thing. And I think the other thing about this is that, you know, when you are writing a book, you will absolutely have these moments of, I can't write today, I don't feel like writing, I'm stuck. And that's when you've come in and you've just given me some new energy or some new direction. Sometimes we've actually left a section and we've gone and written another section and then come back, haven't we? So you've really guided me, which has been awesome. So thank you for that.
Great stuff.
And I want people to obviously understand our relationship because, of course, through doing all of this work, we've got talking, you've got to know me. And one of my big passions is the subject of today's podcast, which is listening. So I've actually named this, Are You Listening? And I know I'm doing a lot of talking right now, but you and I are going to talk and listen to each other. But I really want to dig deep into what listening really is and what listening really means, because it's very easy for us to throw this word around and say, well, are you listening to me? But it's quite a complex action, isn't it? The action of listening. And I want you to tell me a little bit more about some of your takes on listening. So tell me a bit about, if I say to you listening, Gayle, tell me the first thing that you want to talk about when I say something like listening to you.
Well, you know what? The first thing I would want to say is I just think the world needs a damn good listening to, because it's great, isn't it? We're all out there wanting to get our message out, but it can be so difficult, I think. The other side of that coin is the listening piece. And if we're not doing that at least as much as we're talking, at least as much as we're sharing, then we just miss masses of opportunities to connect. So for me, listening is perhaps the bigger half, the bigger part of the connection piece. You know, I think all of us as humans, there's been some research to say we've all got the same kind of psychological drivers, and one up there right at the top is the need to feel understood and to be understood. And the main mechanism for feeling understood is listening. So
Yeah.
listening isn't just about the person behind the counter in Tesco's saying, oh, I want 5 slices of ham, please. It's actually a way of building connection with our fellow human beings and creating stuff together. You can't build without listening. You can't create without listening. And like you say, it's far more complex when you do it properly than it first appears. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's a really underrated skill, because we often talk about getting our message out, which is obviously really important. But there's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of talk about kind of the hustle and all of that sort of thing. But what I would love to shine the spotlight on is the importance of listening for really understanding each other, because when you do that, actually from a sales perspective, that's where the sales come in, because why on earth would you buy something from someone who doesn't understand you? So if you
Yeah.
nail listening, you can nail sales.
Yeah, completely. And the whole listening thing, like we've mentioned, is just so much deeper and so much more complex than you realize. So for instance, as you know, I run my workshops, my Live It, Love It, Sell It workshops, which is great because we're all face to face. It's a huge opportunity. It's very intimate, and I love that work. And part of that is, an exercise where we actually listen. And because we set it up as an exercise, it's really fascinating how many people come back and say, oh my goodness, that was so difficult. Oh my goodness, I have never actually sat down and really thought about what it takes to listen properly, because it's about trying to shut out all of that noise, not just the noise that's in the environment around you, but the noise that's in your head, like, what are we going to have for tea tonight? And I wonder if my son's done his homework. Those
Yeah,
kind of things.
absolutely. Our brains are so complex, aren't they? And I think perhaps even more than that kind of grocery shopping noise, the noise that happens for me when I'm listening, and when I talk to my clients about this too, is the noise about their own performance or their own self. So while they're listening to the other person, they're thinking, oh, but did she mean this, or have I got this right, or how am I going to cope with that? So I used to run a listening helpline. I used to train people for this listening helpline, and that was one of the big barriers to really truly listening, was people were constantly either worrying about what they'd just said and whether it was helpful, or what they were going to say next. Like, how are they going to help? How are they going to predict what's going to come up? How are they going to provide a solution? Whereas actually that's not what listening is about at all. For me, listening is about sort of dropping an anchor into the present moment,
Yeah.
in the same way that mindfulness is. And mindfulness is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but really what it's about is present moment living, present moment attention. And we're not, as a society, geared to live like that, are we? We're
No.
goal oriented, forward looking, next, and listening is about shutting that noise out and saying, hang on a minute, this is about now, not making assumptions, not anticipating what's coming next, not trying to take someone on a path. It's being with them right now. And that's the bit I think that's so difficult, because we're not wired to do that. It's something we need to reconnect into with ourselves, I think.
Yeah, it's such a good point. When I first started in Yellow Pages all those years ago, see, when people listen to this podcast in the future, Gayle, what's going to happen is they're going to go, what the hell is Yellow Pages? Because we had the last edition printed. Now they're never going to be again. But the oldies listening will know about Yellow Pages. But when I worked there, this was a very tough, aggressive, fast-paced environment of sales, and they trained you beautifully. And one of the things that we did a lot of work on was this fact find, and I think now we call it that discovery call. It's called lots of different things, but it's a wonderful part of sales where we really do need to find out and understand, as you've mentioned, about our potential customer or client. And so this fact find piece was a really heavy piece of training all around open questions, what questions you should ask, what order you should ask your questions in, taking them through the steps of the sale. And then what happened was, when you were new at this, You would be so hung up on the questions you had to ask, and when you had to ask them, you never ever listened really properly to the answers they gave to the questions you asked.
That is a beautiful, beautiful illustration of what I was just saying. That, yeah, we get so caught up in our own performance and our own minds because we think we've got to do something right. Whereas actually with listening, for me, the only right way to do it, the only right way to behave is to be here now and allow, rather than force, allow the conversation to unfold,
Yeah.
to see where it goes. I like to think of it as approaching it with a spirit of curiosity. So rather than thinking, I've got a map, I want to get over there, you're like, oh, I've got a map, here's where we are. Wow, let's explore now.
Yeah.
Let me be here right now and explore what's happening. And then you can respond to that in a very accepting, present way, rather than react to it or try and insert one of your trained set pieces into what's coming up. So yeah, absolutely, it's a fantastic example of how sometimes too much formal listening training can just get in our own way. And if we could somehow find a way to sort of plug back into ourselves and trust ourselves that actually what we've got with our ears and paying attention, that's the biggest gift. You know, with our society at the moment, everyone's short on time. Attention is the biggest gift you can give someone, not just their time, because you can be, you know, we could be having this conversation now and I could be on my phone or checking Facebook or checking my emails, but actually giving someone attention and helping them feel understood is perhaps the most important thing you can do for somebody.
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is probably would go into a totally another subject, wouldn't it, really, if we let it? But, you know, I think of, when you talk about this, I think of my son when he comes home from school, you know, and he's got this whole day to download on me because he wants to tell me everything about what's happened in his day. But at that time, I'm still working. My day finishes perhaps a bit later. And I know there are times I can hear him talking and I'm still working, and I really am not listening to him properly. And I know, and I'm aware of it. And that's the time, I think, where we have to stop and say, right, make a decision that you're actually going to stop what you were doing and you're truly going to focus and listen to the person you're with or the person who's talking to you. And in business, it's critical that you do that. It's a real conscious thing, I think, you have to do with listening, is just make sure you're really focusing, as you say, in that moment, as to what they're really saying to you. Because that's the other thing, of course, when you listen, what do you really hear? You know, what do you really hear? Do you hear exactly what they're saying because you are really focused in and no noise is distracting you? That's great, that's brilliant. But also, what do you hear them saying? What are you interpreting in what they're saying? Because that's the other part of listening, isn't it? That assumptive stuff.
Absolutely. And we can't ever, I mean, we're all people, aren't we? We've all got our own unique set of circumstances, history, personalities, strengths, all of that stuff that we bring with us in any given moment. So the conversation you and I might have as people now may be entirely different to a conversation we'll have in next week. So always we've got our own layers of stuff that we bring to any interaction with other people. But it's I think one of the answers to that is just recognizing that we have a lens through which we view someone else, and that pure act of noticing helps us then realize, oh yeah, I'm applying my own particular coat of paint to this. Have I got it right? Or actually, do I need to ask some questions and just check, just do a bit of clarifying and check my understanding here? How, you know, when they say, oh, I don't feel very well, is it that they're worried? Is it that they've got stomach bug? You know, there's always ways to go a little bit deeper and avoid those assumptions by asking some gentle questions, but not necessarily with your own particular end in mind, more with a kind of curiosity about what's happening. And I think that's, for me, is the big difference between this perhaps old school sales potentially type of listening training, and what I would see as real listening, which is this present moment curiosity about what's going on, because that opens up so many opportunities. I used to work in a careers service at a university, and there was a fantastic careers advisor there. But he very firmly believed that children should have a career plan from age 12, because by having a career plan from age 12, they could then go and, choose the GCSE subjects they needed to best fit. They could get all the work experience they needed. They could tap up some, they'd have longer to tap up business contact. And it all made great sense on paper. But of course, the trouble is, by doing that, is if you decide at age 12 you want to be a lawyer, we change all the way. And by having that tunnel vision, straight ahead, A to B mentality, what about all these things that are happening around you? What about all these opportunities you're not missing? You're not seeing, you're missing. And I think that's very much the case with some directed listening. You look for the answers you want to hear, which might serve you in the short term, but then you miss opportunities to connect at a deeper level because they're outside of what you were expecting.
Yeah, totally.
So it's that, isn't it? It's about taking the pressure off yourself to get to a fixed standard goal and just thinking, no, actually, what this is about right now is accepting where we both are right now, leaning into that and exploring it together.
Yeah, I know for a fact in my sales career, which is obviously, as some of you will know if you know me or you've listened to me, 30 years really of sales. Oh, gosh, that makes me feel so old, Gayle. But I just know in that career, when I had these moments when I was really truly listening, because I would have picked up on just something someone said, and I will have created another opportunity because of actually hearing that one thing. I mean, that's particularly in the kind of corporate sales world. But, just those little brush off comments that people might make when you're truly listening, and then you pick up on them. And then you explore them, the curiosity you talked about. Then you explore them, and then you realize, oh my goodness, well, actually, they're going to buy something completely different to what I thought they might buy in the first place. And that's happened to me so much. And that's why I really appreciate this magical ability we have to listen. I truly believe it's got really wondrous things in it if we really get what it's all about, The other thing with the exercise that I do in the workshops, I literally do a 3-minute, two people together, 3 minutes, someone has to talk about anything they want. It can be anything, but they have to talk. The other person cannot interact for 3 minutes. They can nod and smile, but they cannot speak back for 3 minutes. So not only has someone got to talk for 3 minutes, but someone's got to also listen properly and actively for 3 minutes. And then the following 2 minutes, that other person tells the person what they heard them say.
Interesting. And how does that go?
Well, the key things that come out is that people are really uncomfortable about talking for 3 minutes about something that they haven't been given a subject about.
Mm-hmm.
And we're
not used to it, are we?
No. And it's interesting because I always say to them, talk about something you love, which is kind of like, well, that should be easy then, shouldn't it? Maybe a hobby or a passion or whatever. But they really struggle to know what they should talk about. So it's like, this is how blooming structured we seem to be as humans. And the second thing that comes out is that people find it really hard not to talk back for 3 minutes. In some way, they feel like they're being rude by not actually speaking back. And then the third thing, of course, is the 2 minutes you have to then tell the person what you heard them say. Because then you're interpreting what they've said as well as what you heard, but what did that really mean? So it's a really fascinating 5 minutes.
Yeah. What that makes me think of is the power of silence as well. Because I've seen this an awful lot, both in therapeutic settings and then with my own, writing clients, is that if you just shut up when people stop talking, but if you just give them a little bit longer, they'll then say something else, something they weren't even realizing they needed to say. But it comes out because it was there all along, but because our society tells us conversations like a tennis game, bat, 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 we don't give ourselves permission to take off the layers and go a little bit deeper. So silence can just open all sorts of opportunities. And I know you've experienced this in a sales setting too, that actually that silence allows people to create their own solutions,
Yes.
which I think is a superpower in its own right.
Yeah, and you know, away from sales, in the kind of coaching and counselling world, really, silence is heavily used, because especially counsellors, I think, from my experience, I've had counselling in the past for a couple of different things, and I noticed when I was with the counsellor, they often say very little because they're getting you to kind of talk. And by just being silent, you do fill that gap with the next thing. So you do say something else. And so it is very, very powerful, the silence part. But, you know, the listening bit is just so complex. When you think about the brain and how it filters, you know, when you get into the real medical stuff, which I don't even understand, Gayle, you know, your brain is filtering, I think, hundreds of thousands, if not more, pieces of information every second or whatever. You know, it's really amazing when you look at what the brain does with listening. And that's why we can, if we really focus, we can actually do quite a bit in terms of consuming more. But it has to be quite a conscious focus, doesn't it, to really listen intently.
Absolutely. And that makes me think as well that the other side of listening is listening to ourselves, is noticing what we're paying attention to and what we're not paying attention to, and what meanings we're interpreting from people. So, you know, I know I've got people in my life where there might be a bit of a personality clash, or so, you know, in the past we've rubbed each other up the wrong way a little bit, so they might say something to me and I will interpret it completely differently to if one of my children said it or if a friend said it, and they could all be saying exactly the same words. So we add our own layers of meaning onto what we're hearing all the time. So for me, I find it a really helpful practice to kind of just check in with myself, just get out of my head a bit, and actually I do this just by physically, you know, either just wiggling my toes or something, just to check back into my body, because that's almost like a prompt for me to think, okay, the old neurons are firing here. I am adding stuff to this conversation that's not coming from them, it's coming from me, and that's okay. I allow myself to, because I'm a person. But is it helpful? Is it actually helpful? Is it helping them or is it helping me? And if not, thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, the other thing that we mentioned before we came on to record on the podcast, we were chatting, weren't we, Gayle? And we were talking about the listening to yourself in terms of maybe how you're feeling, you know, mentally, physically. You know, there's that listening as well that has to go on, isn't there, in life, which
Absolutely.
I think is really interesting.
It's having that relationship with yourself where you can just build trust with yourself and actually, I think true listening is an act of surrender. I know I used this word with you last week, but trust is another word for it. It's about not being purely focused and directive. It's about allowing what will be to be and knowing you can handle it, whether that's in a sales conversation, a therapeutic conversation, or any other aspect of your life. Listening, because it's about this present moment awareness, is this act of almost giving up control.
Yeah.
And yes, you can then direct the conversation as you want to, and you can ask questions and you can move things onwards, but you're not going to do that as effectively if you haven't done that initial surrender to what is happening right now and accepting what is right now. And I think that's so hard for us to do because we put ourselves under all sorts of pressure. You know, I think a lot of us are driven by the need or the desire to help people. So when you have a conversation with someone, I mean, people do it with friends, don't they, all the time? You know, if someone's had a relationship breakup or an argument or something's gone wrong, it's very easy, I think, for a lot of us to just want to jump in with advice first off. And I noticed that in myself. But actually, when I've been in that situation, do you know what I want? I just want to be heard. That's what I
Yes.
want.
Yes, and that's that again, you know, well, all of this is interesting, actually. This whole conversation for me is interesting, and I hope so for the listeners too, because there are so many elements, as we said at the beginning, to listening, isn't there? And so many ways that you can listen. And in order to help friends and family when there are these, you know, challenges, let's call them, we do have to sometimes stop and say, you know, actually this person probably just does need listening to, as opposed to bombarding with advice, you know, and it's just being mindful of that stuff. I know what's happened with me lately, because Sam, my son Sam, is 13 now. Literally within weeks he's become a teenager, and everybody said this would happen. I was a bit like, that's ridiculous. That can't happen. Yeah, it's happened. But he's a lovely teenager still. I'm sure that's going to kind of progressively get worse. But what's happened with Sam is now I feel like he needs to just vent. He needs to rant and vent, as I would like to describe it. So, you know, if something bad's happened, it's just this, he kind of bombards me with all of these terrible things that are wrong in his world. So there's an element of me, old me, I think, would have just gone straight in with this is what you do, this is your advice, you know, and that helping him. And I've learned with him, and he even told me the other day, I just want you to listen. I don't really need you to say anything. I just want you to listen. And it's really interesting, because that really resonates with what we're saying today.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's, in some ways, offering people advice when they haven't asked for it is disempowering. It's saying to them, you don't know what to do here, I know what to do. And yes, it comes from a good place. I'm going to help you, but you're taking people's agency away. Whereas holding that space for them to vent or rant or talk through what their problem might be in a kind of coaching or a sales setting, allows them to start to come to solutions on their own. And at the point at which they can do that, they're going to be so much more invested in you, because you've helped them feel understood, and you've helped them come to that place of new acceptance with their situation where they are. And actually that's what we all want, really, don't we? We want that sense of meaning, we want that sense of feeling okay about ourselves, and giving people the tools to do that for themselves and make their own decisions is incredibly powerful. Whereas offering them the solutions on a stick straight away takes all that away, and the dynamic then of the relationship is very, very different, and will continue to be different unless you behave differently. So I find it fascinating just what shutting up and letting people vent, what that can do. It's amazing.
It is, isn't it? And like you say, is rather than being disempowering when you're bombarding them with advice, it's actually empowering to let them come to their own conclusion. And so I guess the message from today is like, shut up and listen, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes, stop talk. There's a book, there's a business book out there called Stop Talking, Start Doing, and it's great. You know, it's about people getting off their bottoms and taking action on the things they care about, and I'm all for that. But I'd also say stop talking, start listening, because that is where you're going to get your connection with people. And as soon as you've got that connection with people, and there's been studies done on this, there was a study done in 2014 that showed how when people were offered listening rather than advice or just a kind of silent acknowledgement, they were perceived as more friendly, more trustworthy, more understanding as people. So, and all they had to do was switch off all that noise, as you say, and be there fully with that other person. And it doesn't come naturally, because we are very forward momentum as a species, I think, and as a society, and there's lots and lots of brilliant things that come with that. But actually giving ourselves permission, and I think sometimes it is permission to ourselves on a sales call or down the pub with a friend, to think, actually, it's not my job to solve this right now. My job is to be here right now. And that is enough. It's more than enough. It's so rare that it's like gold dust.
I love that.
Imagine using this essential human quality that we all have, but we haven't flipped the switch. We haven't switched it on, and everyone's got access to it, but we're not using it. And just by doing that, we then have this almost superpower that gives us this connection with other people. Imagine that.
Well, I love that it's a superpower. That really works for me. I love that. Of it. Because actually, you know, in life, as you say, but in my kind of passionate place of sales, this is really a superpower if you can get it right. It will open up so many opportunities for you. That listening piece, as I mentioned earlier, spotting things that actually are completely different to how you had assumed it would be. That's through really great, fabulous listening. So yeah, obviously I knew I would love this conversation, Gayle, and it's been just really interesting to look at all of those real different elements of listening. And to be quite honest, we could probably talk for 3 hours about listening as opposed to just say half an hour. But if I was to say to you, Gayle, what are your 3 top tips? I'm putting you on the spot here. Your 3 top tips about listening. Hit me.
I would say, as far as possible, find your way to tune into the present moment. That's number 1. So whether you already have a mindfulness practice, or whether it's simply that you become aware that you're in a sort of trance of being in the future, or you're worrying about playing back that's something that happened yesterday or even half an hour ago. First of all, noticing that is powerful, and then doing something about it, whether it's getting back into your breathing or get back into your body to bring yourself back. That will help your listening practice enormously. Secondly, I would say give yourself permission to take the pressure off, because we've both talked about this. You talked about it at Yellow Pages. I've had it on the helpline I used to train people to run. People get so caught up with listening well and what questions to use and how am I going to solve this problem and gosh, I really want to help, that they forget they can't hear what the other person's saying. They miss things. So that would be my second thing. And I suppose my third thing is, rather than, approach it with a spirit of curiosity. So rather than have a fixed goal or outcome that you want for a conversation, treat it like a new city. And, you haven't got the guidebook for a new city, so you're just going to have a look round, see what's happening. Treat it like that, and that will allow the conversation to unfold. So I think those 3 principles, and there's also, we haven't really been got into the kind of techniques that people use for listening in terms of paraphrasing and reflecting and clarifying and all of those things, but that's the sort of stuff that you can easily find on Google. There's lots of techniques that people can learn for listening. But for me, if you go a layer deeper than that, it's about those 3 principles of present moment awareness, of permission to take the pressure off, and curiosity. That's your solid platform then to then apply these more technique-based things that will help you be a partner to someone and be with them as you listen.
I love those 3. They're fabulous. I love them so much. I particularly love that kind of city thing, if you're in a city and you just don't have a map or a guide, you can go anywhere.
Yeah. And how fun is that?
Yeah, and you can with listening, and that is where true connection happens. I think when it's just happened. It's almost like effortless. And for me, your word is surrender, which I get. My word is very much about trust. Same thing, same principle with listening. Trust that you can actually hear the things you need to hear, and you can connect the way that you want to connect. Be true you. I think it is the kind of thing for me around listening. Be true you.
Totally. And that will pay off in the long game. If you want to think about it back in the business context, potentially people were trained to get a sale at the end of a call. But what happens maybe if you listen and you don't make that sale, but you've built that trust with someone. I mean, obviously this is your thing, this, but it happens in life that people will come back to you because they trust you and they feel understood, and that is priceless.
Definitely. And they'll remember you. You become memorable, I think, when you are true you, and you've really listened to somebody. There's a respect there, isn't there, I think.
Absolutely.
And never underestimate that people don't realise when you're not listening.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. It's like smiling on the phone, isn't it? People can tell whether or not you've what your face is doing, even if they can't see you.
Yeah.
And I'm not a bit like you with Sam. I fob my kids off all the time sometimes. Oh, well, that's nice, darling, blah blah blah. And it's all gone woof over my head, and they know it, and I have to give myself a talking to and think, right, like you say, it's a choice. Am I here or am I here? And wherever you are, be all there. That's what it comes down to.
I love that. Gayle, I have totally loved our chat. I knew I would. And I really hope this is made for a great podcast, because I think somehow it has, just because it's such a great subject. I'm going to make sure that your links are in the SoundCloud description, so people can find you and see what you do, because you're pretty awesome at what you do. So it'd be great if people want to know more about you. I think from listening to you there, they probably will. So thank you so much for joining me and for your time.
Oh, Jules, it is such an honour to talk to you. I love talking to you anyway, but to get to the chance to talk about this and set the world to rights, it's fabulous. I've loved it. So thank you for inviting me. And I love listening to your podcast. So I shall be listening to all the future ones to come too.
Yeah, thank you. All you got to do is shut up and listen.
You're right.
So guys, you know what? We've done another episode. Episode 4 is done. Episode 4 is fabulous. I'm so loving my podcast. I love it because do you know why? Because it's just in the moment, Gayle, and it is just listening and it is just chatting. And that's what I wanted my podcast to be, the human conversation. So if you've enjoyed this one, you need to go and listen to all the others, obviously. We're now on iTunes. Super exciting. You can find us on iTunes. So do that. And if you love it, rate it and comment. We'd love to know what you think. And we will see you very soon for episode 5. So thank you very much, and ta-da for now.
You've just been listening to the Human Conversation podcast with Jules White. If you enjoyed the show, please let her know on our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/Compassio Coaching.